by Leadership Books. In just a moment, our host, Joseph Baker, will be joining us, along with a very special guest. Before we get started, I would like to introduce you to Joseph. He's a podcaster, event producer, writer, speaker, and audience builder. His passion is to help authors, speakers, and entrepreneurs build their audiences to monetize their leadership. Won't you please welcome our host, Joseph Baker.
Well, welcome everyone to the Compendium podcast. Very excited to be here today with Dr. Mark Goulston. He is our very special guest. Dr. Mark is a business psychiatrist, a coach, a speaker, and a consultant who works with CEOs and leaders to effectively deal with conflicts that they have been avoiding and that is costing them time, money, sleep, and peace of mind. He is the author or co-author of 9 books, with his book, Just Listen, becoming the top book on listening in the world. He is also a Marshall Goldsmith 100 Coaches member, host of the My Wake Up Call podcast, which is in the top 0.5% globally, and a founding member of the Newsweek Expert Forum, a former FBI and police hostage negotiator, trainer, and former UCLA professor of psychiatry. Dr. Mark Goulston, welcome to the Compendium podcast today.
That's a lot to live up to, Joseph, what you just said.
It is. I hope it's all true. Is it true?
I think it is true. It is true. Well, look, when you're in your early 70s, you get to fill in a lot of time doing stuff.
Yes, you've been able to do quite a few things, and it sounds like you are staying very active even today. Is that true?
Yeah, it's well, I'll tell you, I'm in my mid 70s, and I feel a sense of urgency. And so everything I do needs to be meaningful, important. And so I'm focused on that. I have a bit of a health issue, so I'm not going to live as long as I once thought I was. So that's kind of upped the ante about making sure that I leave the world better than I found it.
That's excellent. That's excellent. And that's something that I also think about. I'm not quite at that age yet. I'm in my late 30s, but I actually think ahead. I try to think ahead of what will I be thinking when I'm in my 70s or 80s if I'm blessed to live that long. And I think I'll be thinking some similar things. There's a sense of urgency. So I actually want to embody that urgency now is what I'm trying to do and live the next 30, 40 years in that way.
I think it's a good idea. I was a suicide prevention expert for 25 years and had a pretty good track record. And I used to do house calls to dying patients. And I remember one very wealthy, famous, beloved in public, but private life a shambles person I was doing a house call with. And I said to him, I'll say, you look like crap, but I don't think it's because you're dying. You've been dying as long as I know you. What's going on? And he liked that I could be direct because everybody kind of, kowtowed to him and, kissed the ring and all that stuff.
Sure.
So he liked that I could be direct. And he looked at me and he said, everything I thought was important is unimportant. And everything that I thought was unimportant is important. And I've run out of time to fix it.
Wow.
That's a big wow. That's a big wow. So I'm sharing that wherever I can. And I'm heading in that direction. So I want to make sure that I'm doing what's important.
It's very good. Very wise words. Well, let's talk a little bit about that. You obviously are a prolific author. You're a speaker. Your many things, but let's zero in on some of your work, specifically your published work. You have a variety of books. I had some chance to do some research and see you have several books on Amazon. Some of them have thousands of reviews. You're obviously making a huge impact in the world. I've seen you on the TEDx stage online. If you were to select a book to even dive into right now, what's something that you think would appeal to our audience in the thought leadership space?
Well, Just Listen is what I'm best known for. And I think it's important in the thought leadership space because it's amazing. And the subtitle of Just Listen is Discover the Secret to Getting Through to Absolutely Anyone. And I'll tell you, one of the reasons I've discovered it's important is that when you listen and get where people are coming from, and you're interested in where they're coming from, they choose to engage with you. Whereas if you don't listen to them and you talk over them or at them, or even to them, but you don't get where they're coming from, they sometimes feel like they have to listen to you. And in this day and age where everyone's been beaten up by the pandemic and by just how tough life is, people don't take too kindly to having to do something. I'll share something with you that might be of interest to your listeners. There is an accelerator that I do a training in. It's called Expert Dojo. It has about 20 startups in its cohorts. And every 3 months I do a 6-hour training. And one of the things that they really like is they're looking for how to get through to investors. And when I say to them, how many of you have given a pitch to an investor and in 4 minutes they're smiling and you think it's a yes?
Mm.
And they go, oh, I just did that yesterday. I said, is it a yes? They say no. I said, the reason they're smiling is because after 3 minutes with you, they know it's a no, but they don't want to be rude. They're smiling because, oh, they spent a lot of time with this deck that I have no interest in. So they're smiling like that. And you think at the end of it, they're going to say, when can we start? How much money can I give you? And they say the opposite. And they go, oh my God, that happens to me all the time. And I said, this is what you want to do. And I spoke in Moscow a few years ago, and I headlined with a Nobel Prize winner named Daniel Kahneman. He wrote Thinking Fast and Slow. And I headlined because my books are bestsellers there. And what I tried to teach the audience, and what I want to teach your listeners, and what I want to teach you, is that underneath people listening to you, they're always listening for something.
Mm.
So what I suggest to these early stage companies looking for money is that when you get the smile and you know it's not a yes, you pause and you say, can we stop for a moment? That other person's going to get nervous because you caught them. You caught them trying not to be rude, and they're going to go, what? You could say, yeah, could we stop for a moment? And they're going to go, what? And you say, when we started, you were listening for something and you didn't hear it. In fact, not only didn't you hear it, we got further away from it. Can you tell me what you were listening for? Because my company might have it.
Wow.
We just didn't put it in the deck. And if we have it, I'll pivot and I'll share it with you. You know, maybe we can salvage this conversation. And by the way, if I don't have it, I've got 20 other companies in a cohort I'm in. There may be 2 or 3 that have it, and I'll introduce you. You know, they'll be a good fit for you. You'll be a good fit for them. And so you've taken a polite smile that wasn't going anywhere good, and you've let go of yourself and you've focused on what will make them successful. And you facilitate an introduction to people who will be grateful to you. But can you see how that would work? And here's how I want to apply it to you, Joseph. So you're listening to me, but underneath it, tell me if this is what you're listening for. And then if it is, tell me what you experience inside. I think underneath you listening to me, making sure you check all the boxes of this so-called expert, what you're listening for is someone who can provide incredible value to your viewers and listeners because they trust and have confidence in you that you won't waste their time. And you're listening for guests who won't waste your listeners' time. And you may be listening for a best-selling author who's awful, who totally wastes their time. And then you have to go back and say, oh, I'm so sorry, Dr. So-and-so, Professor so-and-so, we couldn't use the interview because you want to honor your listeners and viewers' trust and confidence because that matters to you. Is that accurate?
Yes, very much so.
And when you start to hear that, you begin to feel, this is great. I'm really serving my listeners and viewers, and I'm honoring their trust and confidence.
That is great. That is really, really good. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for listening.
When you think about that book, Just Listen, what was sort of an aha moment that you had when you were writing it? Maybe something that even surprised you as you were preparing that content.
Well, the aha moment, what Just Listen is about, is how do you cause another person not just to feel understood, but to feel felt? Because a lot of people in this world feel totally alone. And I'm a suicide prevention specialist. And for 25 years, none of my patients died by suicide. And here's what I discovered about suicide. I wrote an article after Anthony Bourdain and Kate Spade died by suicide, and it got 400,000 views in 10 days because the title was Why People Kill Themselves, It's Not Depression. And what I said is, there's hundreds of millions of people who are depressed who don't kill themselves. There's hundreds of millions of people who lose a job, lose a marriage, who don't kill themselves. Now, it may contribute to it, but in my work for 25 years, preventing suicide, what I realized is that at the end, people have despair. And if you break the word despair into DESPAIR, it means unpaired, despair, unpaired with hope, a future, hopeless, unpaired with the power to change their situation, hopeless, powerless, worthless, useless, meaningless, purposeless. And when they all line up like some awful slot machine, pointless to go on. So suicidal people pair with death to take the pain away. Death is compassionate to that kind of pain that doesn't go away. But if they can feel felt by you, they may let go of suicide as the only way to relieve their pain and grab onto you. The book, Just Listen, is an evergreen book. It was first published in 2009. And lately, I've given a name to deeper listening called surgical empathy. Because if you think of this, that when someone is suicidal, they've often been traumatized early in their life. And when people are traumatized, think of it as a drowning person grabbing onto a lifeguard, and the lifeguard has to be trained so that they don't both drown. And when you're going through trauma, you grab onto something, you don't attach, you form a psychological adhesion. Just like in surgery, you go into surgery, you save someone's life, but the organs can adhere to each other, and you have to go back in and lyse it. So surgical empathy goes in to where they have the psychological adhesion to death. And you go in there, and and what happens, and I'm coaching and teaching parents how to do this because I'm retired. Don't see patients anymore because I'm retired. But I do try to teach entrepreneurs, counselors, parents, teachers about how to reach that child you're worried about. And when you can reach that person, they may let go of the suicidal feeling as the only way to alleviate their pain and attach to you. So here's a takeaway, which is going to be the best part of our interview. And hopefully you'll agree.
Sure.
It's what I call the 4 prompts. I have a friend named Jason Reed. His 14-year-old son died by suicide 3 years ago. He left a suicide note saying, "Tell my story." And Jason did a documentary called Tell My Story. And you can find it at chooselife.org, chooselife.org. And we do presentations, and he talks about how he missed all the clues. And I talk about how to reach that person you're worried about. And I talk about the 4 prompts. So if you're a parent and you're worried about your child, or you're worried about a spouse, who's been laid off, the 4 prompts are this. Here's the first one. And you do it while you're doing an activity, while you're driving the car or something, because teenagers can't stand heart-to-heart talks unless they initiate them. First prompt, and the way you tee it up is you say, a lot of us parents are worried about our kids because of the pandemic. Can I just ask you a few things and hopefully they won't blow you off? And then the first prompt is, at its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And they're going to go, what? At its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? Mm-hmm. And if they say, pretty awful, Dad, pretty awful, Mom, here's a little taste of surgical empathy. Pretty awful or very awful? Okay, very awful. Second prompt, and when you're feeling that, how alone do you feel? Pretty alone. Pretty alone or all alone? Okay, Dad. Okay, Mom, all alone. Third prompt, take me to the last time you felt it. What? Yeah, was it at 2:30 in the morning the other night when we heard you walking around in your room? And here's the interesting thing is that when someone shares with you something so clear and vivid that you can see it with your eyes, they re-feel it. Yeah, I was walking around. I couldn't get to sleep. I was frustrated because I had a test the next day. What happened? Well, I got so frustrated. I felt like kicking the wall. What'd you do? I don't know. I was just walking around. I was looking for cough syrup so I could fall asleep. What happened then? It was really terrible, Mom, Dad. But then the sun rose. I felt better. Fourth prompt. I have a favor to ask you, honey. When you're feeling that way, or even close to feeling that, I want you to do whatever it takes to get my undivided attention, or your mom or your dad's undivided attention. Because our minds are going on a million different things, but there is nothing more important than us helping you feel less alone when you're feeling that awful. Can you do that for me? So real quickly, because I do a lot of these podcasts and often people say, can you say those really quickly so our listeners can grab them? Prompt 1, at its worst, how awful are you capable of feeling about your life or yourself? And you don't say it that quickly, but you want to get it off their chest. Prompt 2, when you're feeling that way, how alone do you feel? Prompt 3, take me to the last time you felt that. Prompt 4, I have a favor to ask you. When you're feeling that way or heading in that direction, do whatever it takes to get my or your mom or your dad's undivided attention.
Wow, very powerful. Thank you for sharing that. I know that was a fairly in-depth process to share. And I also just want to say I appreciate the depth of this, podcast episode so far. I think sometimes these episodes can be just conversational. We chat a little bit about your book and move on. But I think what you're doing here is adding some real tangible value, to our listeners, especially those who are parents or friends or cousins, anyone who has a loved one that they're reaching out to. That's really powerful. Thank you for sharing all of that.
Well, my pleasure. My pleasure. It's really interesting. I speak around the world on listening. I can't get arrested in America. I mean, Americans do not want to listen. I've spoken in Moscow twice, Mumbai, Bangalore, Delhi, London, Canada, but Americans do not want to listen. And it's good. I'm not putting Americans down. What it is that they're so pent up. They're so filled to the brim that they don't have any bandwidth in their head to listen. I know I can get that way. And sometimes when I'm just trying to manage the day in front of me, when my wife says, "Oh, don't forget to bring back paper," because I want to be, responsive to my wife. When she says that, I forget to bring my cell phone to the office.
Mm,
To make room for the request, I leave my phone home. It's crazy.
yes. Yes, that totally makes sense. What would you say is something in your book that actually didn't make it into the book? Something that you thought about later that you wish you would have included? Does anything come to mind?
Well, I write for Newsweek as part of the expert forum, uh, and there's an article out called Validational Empathy. So people who know anything about empathy, and I had a fellow, Daniel Goldman, who invented emotional intelligence on my podcast. But there's people usually think of empathy in three levels. There's cognitive, there's emotional, and there's compassionate. Cognitive is more intellectual. Emotional is, leans more towards a little bit of sympathy. Compassionate is really vicariously feeling it with them. But I found another level, which is in this article, validational empathy. And what that's about is the power of believing in another person, not believing in, but believing. And the article talks about this anecdote where a man came in, we'll call Jack, who is very paranoid, and he comes in and he says to me, I've seen 7 psychiatrists in the past couple of years. And I said, well, sounds like you've been busy. He said, yeah, well, now I'm seeing you. And I said, what's going on? And he says, well, before we start, I got to tell you that the people above me just make noise all night long. They drive me crazy. And sometimes I feel like jumping out the window. And I was about to say something sympathetic, emotional or compassionate. And before I said anything, he looks at me and he says, before you say anything, you need to know that I live on the top floor of my building and there's no access to the roof. And then he gave me a Chris Rock gotcha smile, like, huh? It's like, huh? What are you going to do with that, doc? And so I'm going through my mind, the other 7 psychiatrists, I'm thinking of what they said. And they said, I'm sure that's frustrating. And that may be part of why you're coming in. And it may be part of what we can treat you for. And so I went through in my mind all the, empathic things that other people had said. And he's looking at me. And I asked myself, do I want to help him or do I want to give him a reality check and then have him go look for someone else? And he's looking at me like this, Joseph. And I said, Jack? He said, yes. And then I looked into his eyes and I said, Jack, I believe you. And I stared at him. And the smile stopped and his eyes watered up and he started sobbing. I thought to myself, oh, this is great. I've unleashed someone who's paranoid. Really, good job here, Mark. And he's sobbing, but I'm comfortable with this space because that's the space I go into when I'm working with suicidal patients. And so he's sobbing almost like a feral cat. And after about 5 minutes, he stops. His eyes are completely bloodshot. He looks at me and he smiles and he says, it does sound freaking crazy. And then we had a good therapeutic relationship and result. But do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
Was I willing to leave reality to reach wherever he was and be there next to him?
Wow. Very powerful. Thank you for sharing that as well. I know that you have a tight schedule today. You actually have some more instructing and teaching, it appears, that you're doing later today. So I want to honor your time and sort of wrap up this interview today. But before we go, you've shared so much depth and content and a little bit of a little bit of a teaser even into your book and its content. So where can people go to find you and to also find your books?
See, I'm such a good listener. I just put a QR code up, and if you check on that, that'll take you to my LinkedIn profile.
That's
How
great.
was that, Joseph? How was that?
That was
You
great.
didn't even say it, and I did it. Go ahead.
That's great. No,
So
that's
if you go to
great.
my
So-
LinkedIn profile, you can find a lot of what I'm doing. I have a website, markgoulston.com. My wake-up call is kind of going gangbusters, and I have a wide range of people, from Larry King to Jordan Peterson to this wonderful woman, Susan Kane, Gretchen Rubin. And I get about 15 requests to be on it every week. So people can find that wherever they get their podcast. It's only recorded in audio, although I give the video to my guests and I say, post it if you want to post it.
Sure.
Because at my age, I run kind of lean.
Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Mark Goulston. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. Thank you for going deep with us. Thank you for being willing to take that risk and not just have a surface level interview. You know, you actually went deep into your stories, deep into your content, shared some vulnerable things. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for being that listener, for inspiring others. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Well, thank you for giving me a long leash, Joseph, because I took advantage of it. And I was trying to track as I was speaking with you, not over at or to you. I was trying to track with you. And my hope is that you gave me a long leash and you didn't have to rein me in, because my hope is, as you were listening, you were saying, this is pretty valuable stuff. I think my listeners are going to like this. I think my viewers are, hey, this is real value. I'm going to let them talk. I'm not going to interrupt them. So you were wonderful.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our listeners and viewers today for joining us for this episode of the Compendium podcast. Be sure to check out our website as well at leadershipbooks.com, and we will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you for joining us for today's broadcast. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And be sure to visit us online at leadershipbooks.store. There you'll find the works of some of the finest thought leaders today. And be sure to tune in here each week to gain even deeper insights from one of those leaders on the Compendium podcast.